My landlord forced me out so he could raise the rent. 3 years later, I own the building and he was asking me for flexibility. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and this happened in Savannah, Georgia. I wasn't some reckless renter who didn't plan ahead. I was 34. I worked as a senior claims adjuster for a regional insurance company near River Street. Stable job. The apartment I rented wasn't fancy. 6-unit brick building just outside the historic district. I lived in the third-floor unit for almost 6 years. 6 years is long enough to build muscle memory. I knew exactly how long the shower took to heat up. My landlord, Mark Jackson, wasn't warm, but he wasn't awful either. Late 40s. Crisp polos. He liked to talk about investment strategy, like he was running a Fortune 500 company instead of a small apartment building. But he mostly left me alone. Until one Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember because I had just gotten home from work, heels in one hand, laptop bag digging into my shoulder, when I heard a knock. Not a polite knock. A firm, rehearsed one. I opened the door and there he was holding an envelope. "Hey, Sarah," he said, smiling like we were neighbors discussing the weather. "Got a minute?" I knew that tone. That fake casual tone adults use when they're about to tell you something you won't like. He handed me the envelope and said, "We're doing some upgrades to the building. Renovations. So I'll need the unit vacated in 60 days. It took a second to process. Renovations? I asked. Yeah, he nodded. It's nothing personal. Just business. The market's shifting. Just business. My lease had rolled month to month the year before. I knew legally he could give notice. I wasn't stupid. I worked in insurance, I understood contracts. But understanding something legally doesn't make it feel less personal. I said, "What kind of renovations?" "Kitchen, floors, maybe bathrooms. Modernizing. I've got to keep up with market rate." He kept smiling. That smile stuck with me more than anything. It wasn't apologetic. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was clean. Detached. Like I was a spreadsheet cell he was updating. I didn't cry in front of him. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "Okay." But when he left, I sat on my couch staring at the wall for a long time. 6 years. Gone in 60 days. Packing up that apartment felt heavier than it should have. Every drawer I emptied felt like I was undoing proof that I'd built something stable. My boyfriend at the time, Daniel Taylor, tried to be supportive. "It's probably for the best," he said while helping me wrap dishes in newspaper. "You could find something nicer." I wanted to believe that. But nicer meant more expensive. Savannah wasn't cheap anymore. Everything near downtown had jumped in price. I started looking at listings the week after he gave me notice. And that's when I saw it. My unit. Already listed. Same photos. Same layout. Same cabinets. Same floors. No renovations. Just $600 more per month. I remember staring at my phone like I'd misread it. $600. I did the math automatically in my head. That was groceries. Utilities. Savings. That was my cushion. I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Sarah. You said you were renovating," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause. "We are making updates over time," he replied. "But rent reflects market rate now. You were underpaying." Underpaying. That word burned. I paid on time. Every month. Never late. I handled minor maintenance myself half the time because I didn't want to bother him. I was quiet. Clean. Predictable. But loyalty doesn't factor into market rate. "Right," I said. "Okay." He didn't argue. He didn't justify. He didn't apologize. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not rage. Not explosive anger. Just clarity. To him, I was a line item. So I stopped seeing him as anything else either. I ended up moving 45 minutes outside the city into a smaller complex near Pooler. Longer commute. More traffic. Less charm. Every morning I sat on I-16 watching brake lights stretch endlessly ahead of me and thought about that apartment. About how easily I'd been replaced. Susan texted me a few weeks after I left. New tenant already moved in. Young couple. They're paying a lot. Of course they were. Over the next year, I watched from a distance as the building changed. New people. Higher rents. Mark bragging online about strong investment growth. I told myself to let it go. But I didn't. Not fully. Then my aunt, Margaret Wilson, passed away in Macon. She owned a small antique shop most of her life. Never flashy. Never rich. But careful. She left money to my mom, Patricia Johnson, who decided to split a portion between me and my sister, Jessica Davis. When my mom called to tell me, she said, "It's not life-changing, but it's meaningful." Meaningful. That word stuck with me too. The amount wasn't millions. But it was enough to shift possibilities. Around that same time, I ran into Susan for coffee when I was downtown one weekend. She leaned in and said quietly, "Mark's been stressed. Property taxes went up. I heard he's having refinancing issues." I didn't react outwardly. But my brain did what it always does. It started calculating. And for the first time since that envelope landed in my hand, I felt something different. Not hurt. Not even anger. Opportunity. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to ruin Mark Jackson's life. That's important. Because when people hear the ending of this story, they assume I must have been sitting in the dark somewhere, plotting. I wasn't. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my new apartment in Pooler, staring at a spreadsheet. That's less dramatic, but it's the truth. After my Aunt Margaret's estate settled, my mom transferred my portion of the inheritance. It wasn't lottery money. It wasn't quit-your-job money. But it was the largest lump sum I'd ever had in my account at one time. Jessica, my sister, immediately talked about vacations and maybe upgrading her car. That's just who she is, emotional, spontaneous. I'm not built that way. I stared at the number in my savings account and thought, don't waste this. At work, I deal with risk assessments all day. Worst-case scenarios. Liability exposure. Long-term impact. So naturally, I started thinking about investment. Not stocks, I already had those. Not crypto, I like sleeping at night. Real estate kept creeping into my mind. Savannah real estate especially. The same market that pushed me out was still climbing. One night, I was scrolling through public property records online. It wasn't even intentional at first. I was just curious how much buildings in my old neighborhood were selling for. That's when I searched Mark's building. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted to see if he'd sold it. Maybe I wanted proof he was thriving. Instead, I saw something else. A tax delinquency notice. Chatham County had filed a lien against the property for unpaid property taxes. The amount wasn't tiny. It also wasn't catastrophic yet. My stomach flipped. Because I knew how this worked. In Georgia, if property taxes go unpaid long enough, the county can sell the tax lien. Investors can buy that lien. The owner then has a redemption period to repay the debt plus penalties. If they don't, the investor can move toward foreclosure. It sounds dramatic when you say it fast. But really, it's paperwork. Deadlines. Court filings. Waiting. I leaned back in my chair and just stared at the screen. Mark Jackson, who told me I was underpaying, was behind on his property taxes. I closed the browser. I told myself it was none of my business. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, I met Daniel for dinner at a little seafood place near River Street. He noticed I was distracted. You're somewhere else, he said. Just work, I lied. I didn't tell him about the lien. Not because I was hiding something malicious, but because I didn't even know what I was thinking yet. That weekend, I pulled up the property records again. 6 units. All renting at significantly higher rates than what I'd paid. I did rough math. If he was charging what I saw online, the building should have been bringing in solid monthly income. Which meant one of two things. He was overleveraged. Or he was mismanaging cash flow. Either way, the lien told me something important. He wasn't invincible. And for the first time since he handed me that envelope, I didn't feel small. I felt informed. I called my mom the next day. Hypothetically, I said, pacing my living room, what would you think about investing in property? She laughed lightly. That depends. Are we talking about a condo or something crazy? Just hypothetical, I repeated. She got quiet for a moment. If you're asking me seriously, I'd say only do it if you understand it. Don't chase emotion. That line hit harder than she realized. Don't chase emotion. Was I? I opened a fresh spreadsheet and started plugging in numbers, estimated rental income, taxes, maintenance reserves, legal costs. I factored in worst-case scenarios. Vacancies. Repairs. Legal delays. Even if it took time, even if it was messy, the building could be profitable under stable management. The risk wasn't insane. But it wasn't nothing either. And here's the part one don't know how to explain without sounding cold. I didn't fantasize about revenge. I fantasized about control. About never being forced out like that again. About owning the place instead of begging to stay. A week later, I contacted a local real estate attorney, William Rodriguez. His office was in a modest building near downtown Savannah. Clean, quiet, practical. I told him, I'm interested in a tax lien purchase. I want to understand the process. He didn't blink. Didn't ask why. He explained redemption periods, interest penalties, foreclosure timelines, court procedures in Chatham County. He made it sound exactly what it was. A financial mechanism. Just understand, he said calmly, this can take time. And the owner has every legal right to redeem the property during the period. I know, I said. And I meant it. If Mark paid his taxes and cleared the lien, that would be the end of it. But if he didn't, then I'd be positioned. That night, I barely slept. Not because I felt guilty, but because I felt awake. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. The lien sale date came. I wired the funds. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelling in the background. Just a confirmation email and a receipt. I bought the tax lien on the building I used to live in. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell Jessica. I didn't even tell my mom. Because I didn't know yet if it would turn into anything. Mark had a redemption period. Months to fix it. Months to refinance. Months to pay the county what he owed plus penalties. If he handled his business, the story would end there. But as the weeks passed, nothing changed. No redemption. No clearance. And every time I drove downtown for work and passed near my old neighborhood, I felt this quiet hum under my skin. Not anger. Not hatred. Just patience. The clock was ticking. And for once in my life, I wasn't the one scrambling. The strangest part about playing the long game is how boring it is. People think revenge or justice or whatever this was feels electric. It doesn't. Most of the time it feels like checking email and waiting for something to update. Mark had 12 months to redeem the lien. 12 months to pay the back taxes, penalties, and interest. 12 months to make this entire thing disappear. At first, I checked the county records almost daily. Then weekly. Then I forced myself to stop obsessing. Nothing changed. Meanwhile, life kept moving. Daniel and I started drifting. Not because of the lien, he didn't even know about it, but because I was changing in ways I couldn't fully explain. I was more focused. More distant. My mind was always calculating something. One night he said, "You've been somewhere else lately." I almost told him. I almost said, "I bought the tax lien on my old building." But I didn't. Because if I said it out loud, it would sound personal. And I was still trying to convince myself it wasn't. About 6 months into the redemption period, I ran into Susan Miller again. We grabbed coffee near Forsyth Park. She rolled her eyes and said, "Mark's been complaining about expenses nonstop. Property taxes, insurance, interest rates. He says the city's squeezing landlords." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Is he still raising rent?" I asked casually. "Oh yeah," she said. "Every renewal." Of course he was. That confirmed what I already suspected. Cash flow wasn't the issue. Liquidity was. He was stretched thin. I didn't feel sorry for him. But I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt steady. When the redemption deadline finally passed, I didn't celebrate. I emailed William Rodriguez. "Redemption period has expired," I wrote. "Next steps." The reply came the next morning. "We file for foreclosure." That word carries weight. Foreclosure. It sounds violent. Like something is being ripped away. But legally, it's a process. Petition filed. Notice served. Court date scheduled. The paperwork moved forward quietly. Methodically. Mark would receive official notice that the lien holder, me, was initiating foreclosure proceedings. There was no way to do that anonymously. My name was attached. Sarah Rodriguez. I wondered what he would think when he saw it. Would he recognize it immediately? Or would it take a second? The first hearing was scheduled at the Chatham County Courthouse on a humid Tuesday morning. I took the day off work. I dressed the way I do for important meetings, navy blazer, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. Neutral. Professional. William met me outside the courtroom. "Just stay calm," he said. "This is procedural. He can still attempt redemption before final judgment, but the window's closing." I nodded. Then Mark walked in. He looked different. Less polished. No crisp polo. Just a wrinkled button-down shirt and tension in his jaw. He didn't see me at first. When the clerk read the case name and my name followed his, that's when he turned. Our eyes met. Recognition hit his face slowly. Confusion first. Then disbelief. Then something sharper. After the brief procedural discussion, the judge scheduled the next step. It wasn't dramatic. No gavel slamming. Just process moving forward. When we stepped into the hallway afterward, Mark approached me. "Sarah," he said, like he wasn't sure. "Yes." He looked at William, then back at me. "You bought the lien?" "Yes." He laughed once, short and humorless. "You're kidding." "No." For a moment, we just stood there, courthouse noise humming around us. He leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. "This is about the apartment." I held his gaze. "This is about unpaid taxes." His jaw tightened. "You're being vindictive." That word again. Vindictive. I thought about the day he handed me that envelope. About how calm he was. How detached. "I made a legal investment," I said evenly. "You had a redemption period." "You don't understand how this works," he snapped. "There are refinancing delays. Timing issues." "I understand deadlines," I replied. That hit him. Because he knew I did. For a second, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not arrogance. Not superiority. Fear. He stepped back and ran a hand through his hair. "You're really going to take the building?" "If the process completes," I said. "This is personal." "No," I answered. "It's business." I didn't smile when I said it. But I saw the words land. The weeks that followed were tense. Mark attempted to file motions for extension. William handled them calmly. Procedural responses. Documentation. Timelines. Mark had opportunities. He couldn't secure the funds. Interest rates were high. Lenders were tightening. Every day that passed narrowed his options. And I started to feel the weight of what this would mean. If the foreclosure finalized, I wouldn't just own a piece of paper. I'd own a 6-unit apartment building. With tenants. With maintenance issues. With responsibility. One night, I finally told Daniel. We were sitting on his couch when I said, "I need to tell you something." And I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and said quietly, "So if he doesn't pay, you get the building?" "Yes." He was silent for a long moment. "Are you doing this because it's smart?" he asked. "Or because you're angry?" The question stung. "Both can be true," I said. He nodded slowly. "Just make sure you can live with whichever one wins." That stayed with me. Because by then, I knew something important. This wasn't about destroying him. It was about never feeling powerless again. The final hearing was set for early spring. And unless Mark found a miracle between now and then, the same building I once carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs, would legally become mine. Not because I stole it. Not because I tricked him. But because he missed a deadline. And I didn't. The final hearing didn't feel dramatic. There was no shouting. No cinematic speech. No last-minute check sliding across a table. Just fluorescent lighting, paperwork, and a judge confirming what had already been set in motion months ago. When Judge Barbara Garcia reviewed the file, she spoke in that steady courtroom tone, neutral, procedural. Redemption period expired. No full payment tendered. Petition for foreclosure granted. That was it. A building changed hands in less than 10 minutes. I expected to feel something huge in that moment. Triumph. Vindication. Instead, I felt, still. Mark didn't look at me when we walked out of the courtroom. He looked straight ahead, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. I didn't follow him. I didn't try to talk to him. There was nothing left to say. 2 weeks later, the deed was officially transferred. I stood in front of the building on a humid Savannah afternoon with a new set of keys in my hand. The same brick facade. The same narrow staircase. The same chipped railing I used to steady myself on when I carried groceries upstairs. Except now, it was mine. I walked up to the 3rd floor first. My old unit. The door was painted a different color now. I could hear muffled laughter inside, probably the young couple Susan mentioned. For a second, I pictured myself knocking and saying, I used to live here. But I didn't. That wasn't the point. I wasn't there to reclaim the past. I was there to manage the present. The first few weeks were overwhelming. Plumbing issues I never knew about. An electrical panel that clearly hadn't been updated in years. One tenant, Linda Brown, told me the hallway lights flicker every few nights. I reported it months ago. I wrote everything down. I called contractors. I scheduled repairs. I didn't rush. But I didn't ignore anything either. And something interesting happened. The tenants relaxed. You can feel when people expect to be dismissed. It's in their tone. The way they over-explain problems like they're bracing for pushback. After the first round of repairs, Christopher Wilson, who worked remotely and was home most days, said, "This is the fastest anything's ever been fixed here." That hit harder than I expected. Because I remembered how long I used to wait for responses. I remembered tightening cabinet screws myself because it was easier than asking. I made a decision early on. I wasn't going to jack up rents immediately. Yes, technically I could have pushed everything to the top of market value. But stability mattered to me. So I froze increases for the first year. Except for one unit. The smallest ground floor apartment. Mark's unit. After the foreclosure finalized, Mark had to move out of his house. I don't know the full story, whether he lost it in refinancing or sold it to cover debts. But a few weeks later, I got a rental application. Name, Mark Jackson. For the smallest unit. I stared at the application longer than I should have. William had warned me this could happen. He may try to stay in the building, he said earlier. It's not uncommon. Legally, I didn't have to accept him. But denying him purely out of spite would have crossed a line. So I approved it. Standard background check. Standard lease terms. No special treatment. The first time he came to sign the lease, he looked smaller somehow. Not physically. But the confidence was gone. He sat across from me at a small folding table I'd set up in the vacant unit. "You're serious about this," he said quietly. "Yes." He skimmed the lease. His eyes stopped at the rent amount. It was 20% higher than what he'd previously charged other tenants for similar units before the increases. It reflected actual current market value. He looked up at me. "That's steep." "It's market rate," I said evenly. The silence stretched between us. For a split second, I wondered if he'd throw my own words back at me. Instead, he just nodded. "I'll make it work." He signed. And just like that, the man who once handed me an envelope with 60 days' notice was signing a lease with my name at the top. The first month he paid on time. The second month, 3 days late. I sent a polite reminder email. "Just a heads up, rent is now past due per the lease terms." He replied within an hour. "I'll send it tonight." No attitude. No excuses. Just compliance. Sometimes I see him in the courtyard. He avoids eye contact. I don't chase it. I don't gloat. But there was one moment that crystallized everything. About 6 months after he moved in, he knocked on my door, the unit I'd converted into a small management office. He stood there looking uncomfortable. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "Sure." He stepped inside. "I've had some unexpected expenses," he began. "Medical stuff. I was wondering if there's any flexibility on rent this month. Maybe a partial payment arrangement." There it was. Flexibility. The word hung in the air. 3 years ago, I'd asked about flexibility when he raised rent $600 overnight. There had been none. He watched my face carefully, probably expecting a cold response. Instead, I said calmly, "Per the lease, partial payments incur late fees unless pre-approved." He swallowed. "I understand." I let a few seconds pass. "I can approve a short-term payment plan," I said finally. But the full balance has to be cleared within 30 days. Relief flickered across his face. Thank you. I didn't smile. I didn't remind him of anything. But when he left, I sat there for a long time. Because that was the moment I realized something important. I had power. Not chaotic, destructive power. Measured power. And what I did with it would define who I was. Owning that building didn't magically fix my life. Daniel and I eventually broke up. We were heading in different directions long before the foreclosure finalized. But I stayed. I kept managing the building. I reinvested profits into improvements. Slowly, steadily, the place stabilized. And sometimes, late in the evening, I stand in the courtyard and look up at the third-floor windows where I used to live. I remember carrying boxes down those stairs with tears in my eyes. I remember feeling disposable. Now I hold the keys. But the question that keeps circling my mind isn't whether I won. It's whether I became something different along the way. Owning the building didn't feel powerful the way I thought it would. It felt quiet. No fireworks. No dramatic moment where the universe applauded me for being patient. Just rent payments coming in on the first of the month and maintenance requests showing up in my inbox. Life settled into routine. Christopher renewed his lease without hesitation. Linda thanked me after the hallway lighting was finally rewired. Even Susan, who had stayed through all of it, told me one afternoon, "It feels calmer here now." Calmer. I liked that word. Mark kept to himself. He paid on time most months. Occasionally a few days late, but always within the grace period we agreed on after that first flexibility conversation. He didn't try to charm me. Didn't try to argue rates. Didn't bring up the past. And I never brought it up either. But Savannah is small enough that you run into people. One Saturday afternoon, I was at a hardware store picking up supplies for a minor repair when I heard my name. Sarah. I turned. Mark was standing near the paint aisle. He looked tired, but steadier than he had during the court process. We stood there for a second, not sure which version of ourselves to use. The past one. Or the current one. "I've been meaning to say something," he said finally. I waited. "You run the building well. The tenants talk." It wasn't an apology. But it wasn't nothing either. "Thank you," I replied. He nodded. I overextended. I thought I could keep pushing rents and it would cover everything. Didn't plan for taxes rising the way they did. There it was. Not an excuse. Just explanation. For a brief second, I saw him not as the man who smiled while pushing me out, but as someone who gambled and miscalculated. And lost. "I didn't force you into foreclosure," he added quietly. "No," I said. "You didn't." We both knew the rest of the sentence without saying it. But I positioned myself. That night, I sat on my balcony thinking about everything that had happened. The eviction. The spreadsheet. The courthouse hallway. The lease signing. I tried to trace the line back to the moment this became more than just investment. Was it when I saw the $600 increase? Was it when he said I was underpaying? Or was it when I realized I never wanted to feel that powerless again? The truth is uncomfortable. If he had never forced me out, I wouldn't own that building. If he had handled his taxes responsibly, I wouldn't own that building. If my aunt hadn't left me that inheritance, I wouldn't own that building. So was it strategy? Luck? Resentment? All of it? Sometimes I replay the conversation where he called me vindictive. At the time, I rejected it. Now, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't destroy him. I didn't evict him when I legally could have. I approved his payment plan. I maintained the property responsibly. But I did raise his rent to market rate. I did mirror his own words back to him. I did take the opportunity when it appeared. And part of me won't pretend that didn't feel satisfying. There's a difference between cruelty and accountability. I think I stayed on the accountability side. But the line is thin. The building is stable now. I refinanced under my own name at a manageable rate. I built an actual reserve fund. When something breaks, it gets fixed. I'm not trying to squeeze every dollar out of it. I'm trying to keep it solid. And sometimes, late at night, when Savannah is humid and quiet, I walk through the courtyard and look up at the third-floor window that used to be mine. I remember crying in my car after I saw that rent listing. I remember feeling disposable. Now I'm not. Not because I crushed someone, but because I positioned myself. Mark still lives in the ground floor unit. We're polite. Professional. There's no friendship. No open hostility. Just balance. He once told me, it's just business. And now, in a strange way, it is. But here's the part one keeps circling back to. If I had purely seen the lien as an opportunity, would it feel different? If I hadn't been hurt first, would I have made the same move? Did I build something strong out of resilience? Or did I quietly let revenge guide my hand, just carefully enough to call it strategy? I genuinely don't know. So, did I make a smart investment? Or did I win because I couldn't let go?